Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Are both the major alliances in Maharashtra about to collapse? Or is this just political brinkmanship as the four big parties struggle to maximize the seats they'll fight? That's the discussion in part 2. But first, it's 8 years to the day since the Supreme Court ordered far-reaching and badly needed police reforms, but its orders have been effectively ignored by both the centre and state governments. And the surprising thing is that for 8 years, the Supreme Court has accepted this rebuff. So tonight we ask, how critical were the reforms the Supreme Court ordered? What steps are needed to implement them? And has the time come for the court to act if it continues to be ignored? That's the first debate tonight. And now joining me to discuss the police reforms ordered by the Supreme Court 8 years ago but ignored by all governments is the former DGP of Uttar Pradesh and Chief of the Border Security Force who first petitioned the Supreme Court in this matter, Prakash Singh. Former Police Commissioner Delhi and Governor of Jharkhand, Ved Marwa, former Police Commissioner of Mumbai and now BJP MP Satyapal Singh, the Director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative Maya Daruwala, and leading Supreme Court lawyer and amicus curiae in this matter, Raju Ramachandran. Let's start with the main police reforms ordered by the Supreme Court 8 years ago to this day, the 22nd of September 2006, and why they are important, so we can understand what's needed and why it's needed before we come to the question of where those reforms stand and how we need to push them forward. First, Mr. Prakash Singh, the court called for a separation of the law and order and investigative arms of the police forces. Why is that so important?
This arrangement Supreme Court mandated for metropolitan towns with a population of more than 10 lakh. The idea is that, you see, in big towns you have bandobast problems almost every day, and bandobast problems are very important for the police chief of that metro town. And the temptation and the tendency which we've noticed was that the entire police staff would be geared to ensuring that the bandobast is peaceful, and say the Chinese president's visit passes off peacefully,
and
or,
as a result,
the Kumbh Mela
investigation would suffer because there wouldn't be manpower for it.
With the result that investigation suffered. So we said that no, the two should be separated in metro towns, and separation would have to be accompanied by augmentation in staff.
I'll come to augmentation of staff in a moment's time, but the first thing was to separate these functions so that investigation gets the attention it deserves and isn't made secondary.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's right. That's right.
Now, Mr. Marwa, the Supreme Court also called for the setting up of what was called state security commissions to protect the police from unwanted political interference. As a former police commissioner, Delhi, and as a former governor, how serious is the problem of political interference?
Well, it's a very serious problem because political interference is there not only in appointments and promotions of officers, it's also there in registration of FIR, investigation. You see, police resources are limited, and how those resources are utilized is discretion of the police officers, and that discretion, if exercised in a malefied manner, it needs to be curbed.
So political interference would lead to malefied exercise of police powers?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Maya Daruwala, thirdly, the Supreme Court ordered that DGPs must be selected from a short list of 3 put up in a panel by the UPSC, and then when selected they would have a fixed tenure of at least 2 years. The court also ruled that critical field officers like IGs, deputy IGs, SPs and SHOs would also have a 2-year tenure. In your eyes, how important is this in ensuring that critical level police officers are A, able to operate freely, and B, professionally?
You see, these things are ordered because there has been so much subversion of what should go on in the police management. So now you have to make it so by statute. You have to say, no, put these people there, make sure that they're only there for 2 years, or make sure that they're there for a minimum of 2 years, don't transfer them out, make sure that these people, it's all a package to make sure that both merit as well as experience as well as service, and put the right man in the right job. But the problem is that the court had to actually direct it, and since then some police acts etc. have put it into their into the statute.
Let me stop you there.
What should be common sense?
Let me stop you. How the court has been diluted and how its orders have been ignored, I'll come to in a moment's time. What I first want to establish is the criticality and importance of the orders. And you're saying this requirement that DGPs and other critical level officers should have a minimum 2-year tenure was important to ensure that they had the freedom to act professionally and that they were not interfered with. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes, they certainly should not be transferred indiscriminately.
All right. Now, Mr. Satyapal Singh, fourthly, the Supreme Court called for the setting up of what were called police establishment boards to decide all transfers and postings. And if I recall correctly, the Supreme Court said that state governments could only interfere with the board's decision in A, exceptional circumstances, and B, only after recording reasons in writing for doing so. As a former police commissioner of Mumbai and now an MP, how important is this step in assuring both the autonomy as well as the efficiency of police officers?
Let me start that this police establishment board, as mandated by the Supreme Court, though perhaps in every state, by my own experience in Maharashtra and police commissioner Mumbai, Pune and Nagpur, it generally remains on paper. And there is so much of political interference that it is, I personally feel, that not more than 60 to 70% recommendations of this police establishment board are accepted by the political leadership. And it has created on the ground lot of disciplinary problems.
Okay.
Second thing about this tenure of having 2-year fixed tenure or a stable tenure, that is also not going to affect much, because what happens in Maharashtra, we have a Transfer Act which mandates a minimum tenure of 3 years, especially for the field SHO level officers. And sometimes when a unit commander wants to change him, but he cannot do it because the file moves up to the chief minister level, not even up to the home minister. It creates
I take your point.
lot of problem, lot of administrative problem and discipline problems.
I take your point, Mr. Satyapal Singh. You're actually arguing the opposite. You're saying that in fact a fixed tenure sometimes can go against the interest of efficiency, because when you want to move a man who's not functioning properly, you can't. The file has to go all the way to the chief minister. So this can be both a plus as well as a negative recommendation. Mr. Ramachandran, fifthly,
Yes.
The Supreme Court ordered that a police complaints authority should be set up, headed by a retired High Court or a retired Supreme Court judge, to hear public complaints against the police. Now, as amicus curiae in this matter, how important or critical was this recommendation in terms of A, tackling, and B, assuaging public criticism with the functioning of the police?
Karan, you are of course going point by point, but what needs to be understood is that all these 6 directions of the Supreme Court were founded on the principle of Article 21, that is the right to life and liberty. The entire criminal justice system in the country is supposed to subserve this basic right under Article 21. This is the right both of the victims of crime and it is the right of accused persons.
But can I stop you there?
This is so fundamental.
Can I stop you there? You're replying.
Each one of these directions.
Can I stop you?
Yes.
I fully understand that these reforms are grounded in the Supreme Court's critical interpretation of Article 21 and the right to liberty. That I accept. That is the legal basis for these reforms. I'm asking a slightly different question.
Yes.
I'm saying, how critical is a police complaints authority in tackling and assuaging the public criticism many lay people have of the police? How important was it in terms of responding to the fact many people feel the police don't function properly? That's the question I'm putting to you.
No, the reason why I didn't answer that separately was that it's so self-evident that it's important. It is so self-evident that for confidence of the public in the criminal justice system, you need this police complaints authority.
Okay, you're absolutely right when you say it's self-evident. It clearly wasn't self-evident either to the central government or the state governments, because they haven't implemented it effectively, or where they have, they've done it by distorting it. Let me sum up, Mr. Marwah, through your eyes, the critical importance of all the 5-6 reforms that we've discussed one by one. Mr. Prakash Singh, in a note that he's made, and I'm deliberately not putting this to him, because in a sense he's the man behind these reforms, I'm therefore asking you this question. In a note Mr. Prakash Singh has prepared, he says, these police reforms are essential to protect the democratic structure of the country and to sustain the momentum of economic progress. And he adds, they are a sine qua non to improve governance and to uphold the rule of law in the country. Do you agree?
Absolutely. First thing is that these recommendations are based on the recommendation of the National Police Commission, Dharamvira Commission, which were made in 1981. So various political governments have come, but none of them has implemented any of these recommendations.
And you're saying something else, that there's a long history behind the need for these reforms, and that history goes back 2-3 decades.
Absolutely. And why, you see, why they are necessary? Police is supposed to implement the rule of the law, but they become the violator of the rule of law, because instead of protecting life and property of the ordinary citizen, they pursue agendas of the ruling political party.
And these reforms are designed to make the police accountable and responsible, and also democratic.
To the rule of law. And that can be done if you make the police accountable and transparent. Okay. There is a lot of misinformation. There's a misinformation. These reforms mean more police powers, but nobody is asking for more police powers.
Absolutely. Let's not go into the misinformation. We've established very credibly what the major reforms are. We've been through them one by one. We've established why they're important, and you've given us the overall view that these are critical to good governance. Now, the problem, Mr. Prakash Singh, is that 2 years after the Supreme Court ordered these reforms in 2006, in 2008, the Supreme Court set up a committee under Justice K.T. Thomas to inquire how these reforms were being implemented. And in August 2010, Justice Thomas's committee reported, and I'm quoting, practically no state has fully complied with those directives so far, either in letter or in spirit. Spell out for me how poorly or how negligently the states have actually responded to what was, after all, an order from the Supreme Court to state and central governments.
You see, the states' response, we can divide that in two categories. A, the states which have passed executive orders. B, states which have legislated, passed police acts. Now, coming to the first category, the states which have passed executive orders purportedly in compliance with the Supreme Court directions. But if we go into the details, we find that the institutions which they have set up, say the State Security Commission or Police Establishment Board or the Complaints Authority, either their charter has been diluted, or their powers have been curtailed, or their composition has been adulterated.
Let me stop you there. What you're saying is those who've done it by legislative authority, by executive authority, have actually diluted what the Supreme Court ordered, or subverted what the Supreme Court ordered, or somehow circumvented it.
Yes,
none of these have actually fulfilled what the Supreme Court ordered.
Well, there are different degrees. Okay. Some have been reasonably complied with the directions. Some have blatantly
not
defied.
But no one has fully complied.
No one has fully complied.
What about those who acted by legislative measures? What did they do?
Now, coming to the second category. Now, you see, the Supreme Court judgment contained a specific clause. It said that these directions will hold good till such time as the states pass their own laws on the subject. Now, this was a necessary proviso in the judgment, because Supreme Court can only fill the legislative vacuum. It cannot legislate.
Absolutely.
Right. So they had to give this proviso in the judgment. Now, these states, they were very clever. Something which they had not done for 60 years, they did within the 6 months. At least within 6 months, the process started.
Which is what? Spell it out.
The idea was to circumvent the implementation of Supreme Court directions by legislating, by passing an act, and then telling the Supreme Court, now we are beyond your purview.
So, in fact, the states that legislated did two things. One, as you say, they circumvented the Supreme Court orders, and secondly, they actually attempted to bluff the Supreme Court into believing they were doing what the Supreme Court wanted when they were actually circumventing it.
That's right. They gave a legal cover to the status quo.
Mai Daruwala, I want to bring you in to get you to corroborate as an independent person what clearly Mr. Prakash Singh, as the man who petitioned the Supreme Court, has a vested interest in. And I want you, as the director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, which very closely monitors the police as well as the case for reforms, ask you this question. Do you accept that whether you talk about states who legislated or whether you talk about states who acted by executive authority, in both cases, they've A, failed to fully implement what the Supreme Court ordered, and B, in many cases, they've diluted and subverted, and in some cases, they've altogether circumvented. Do you agree with that conclusion from Mr. Prakash Singh?
Karan, we've just done a study on the state security commissions and earlier a study on the police complaints authorities. Both of them show that there are state security commissions, they have been set up, they don't meet, the minutes are not there, they are not having any effect on the relationship between the political executive and the police. They're supposed to be a buffer body between them. They're supposed to look after the planning, the provisioning, the performance of the police. This is not getting done. The Police Complaints Authority are going the way of every other one of those kinds of authorities. They are under-resourced, poorly manned, badly appointed. Some of them have got police officers, serving police officers, and retired police officers.
Can I ask you, before we get confused with the detail, you're basically agreeing with the point Mr. Prakash Singh made, that whether we're talking about legislative measures or executive measures, the states have subverted, diluted, or circumvented what the Supreme Court wanted. They have not fully complied. You're agreeing with that, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Okay. In which case, Mr. Ramachandran, let me put this to you. It's 8 long years to the day today since the Supreme Court ordered 6 specific directives. Yes. And you've just heard 2 independent people say that the states have either subverted or diluted or circumvented. They clearly have not fully complied. And that's true of the central government as much as it's true of all the state governments. And this amounts to defiance of the authority of the Supreme Court. So why hasn't the Supreme Court taken action against all these governments for contempt of court?
Karan, these directions, in the very nature of things, unlike, say, a money decree passed by a civil court, they require reciprocity, they require a culture of constitutionalism to be there on the part of the states. Now, filing contempt petitions, summoning chief secretaries, sending chief secretaries to jail doesn't solve the problem, because the non-compliance is on account of lack of political will. And therefore,
can I stop you there? Can I stop you there? Can I stop you there? It was. I'm interrupting you, Mr. Ramachandran. I'm interrupting you because I want to put to you an obvious question. The reason why Mr. Prakash Singh petitioned the Supreme Court in the first place is because there was no political will to do these things. Therefore, he went to the Supreme Court. The reason the Supreme Court ordered the states and the central government to act in these 6 ways is because they knew, left to themselves, they wouldn't do it. So the Supreme Court already knows that lack of political will is the key problem. Now, after having given orders, the Supreme Court has sat by for 8 years watching its order being either subverted or diluted or circumvented. Therefore, it's watched its own authority being defied, if not kicked in the teeth. And yet, the Supreme Court hasn't acted. Why? What's the point of delivering directions to the government, which are the law of the land till there is legislative measures to replace them, and then watch your own orders being subverted or ignored? That is surely a form of negligence, if I may so put it, on the part of the Supreme Court.
No, you're being unfair to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court, unfortunately, the way it is constituted, the arrears which the court has, this particular case has to be heard by a bench of 3 judges only, because the main judgment is by a bench of 3 judges.
But you had 8 years to constitute a bench of 3 judges. Surely that's not an impossible task. I mean, so what? You've got 8 years to constitute.
Please listen to me. Karan, please understand the functioning of the court. Of course, the court is moving slowly. Some chief justices have lost interest in this case. That is a fact. That is a fact which Mr. Prakash Singh and I are both facing. But now a new bench has taken up the matter again. The constitutional validity of some of these laws which don't conform to the spirit of the court's direction is going to be adjudged in the month of November. Unfortunately, our court system is slow, but it is not that the court has turned a blind eye. That would not be fair to the court.
I think the critical part of that answer was that, in fact, some Chief Justices have lost interest in this issue. And what it really amounts to is this, that when the court was interested,
that's right,
it acted. Thereafter, having acted, the court lost interest, so it didn't care that its own orders were being defied and its authority being treated with contempt. And therefore, would you agree with my point that actually the Supreme Court itself has been, how shall I put it, I'm trying to be euphemistic, negligent? Maybe some others would say irresponsible in not pursuing this matter itself.
I would not like to pronounce a judgment on the functioning of the Supreme Court.
Nor am I. I'm only asking you for your comment.
But let me tell you, let me tell you what actually
happened. Can't, but I'm asking Mr. Prakash Singh. I'm not asking you, I'm asking Mr. Prakash Singh. You're in an awkward position, you're a friend of the court, that's what amicus curiae stands for. You can't be critical even if you want to be, and I'm sure you would want to be, but you're too discreet. I'm asking Mr. Prakash Singh as the petitioner who got an order which everyone thought was landmark, 8 years have passed, it hasn't been implemented. How much blame vests with the Supreme Court for that lack of implementation?
You see, what happens really that once the bench starts taking the bull by the horns and they start pushing things forward, as Justice Singhvi did, the strategy of the judges, and mind you, every time this case is taken up, there is a battery of at least 25 advocates representing the different states, and their effort is, when they find the state, the judiciary really pushing forward, they raise constitutional issues.
Can I interrupt you there? You're suggesting as an excuse for the fact judges haven't pursued this for 8 years, that lawyers raise technical issues and blind the judges with detail. A good judge should have the capacity to cut through all of that, and if he can't, he shouldn't be judged. Lawyers do this all over the world. That's a legal tactic. Now, if a judge can't cut through the obfuscation that lawyers deliberately raise, then frankly, forgive me, he or she ain't worth being a judge.
I agree with you, but let me tell you. You agree with me? Yes, I agree with you. Of all the judges, I mean, the one Justice Singhvi, I would like to make a special mention of him. He was really going very seriously with it.
But he didn't go seriously enough because 8 years have passed and the orders aren't implemented.
But then
let me bring in Mr. Satyapal Singh. Mr. Satyapal Singh, you're not only a police commissioner who from his training and his work in the police knows how important these reforms are, but today you're a member of the ruling party which has a majority of its own in the Lok Sabha. You don't need any allies in the Lok Sabha to pass legislation. Can you give me any assurance as an MP and as a former police commissioner that you will put effective pressure within your party to make sure that corrective steps are taken to A, make the centre in compliance with the Supreme Court orders, and B, to ensure that state governments are in compliance? Will you take that up as an initiative?
Certainly, I would like also to state that the BJP manifesto 2014 elections have clearly stated that the BJP, if it comes to power, it will carry out the police reforms, administrative reform and judicial reforms, and whatever are the directions of the Supreme Court in this regard, it should be implemented, and it has already been on this last week only.
Can I stop you? You're simply giving me the intention or an assurance that any good politician will give these days on television. What's the proof that you'll deliver what you're saying you're committed to? That's the key question. Set a deadline by when these reforms will be implemented, at least in Delhi, where the police come directly under you. You don't control the states. You may not be able to set a deadline for the states. Give me a deadline for Delhi.
No, I am not in a position to give you the deadline, but I personally, certainly agree that the central government for the start implementing it for the Delhi and all the union territories, and not only that, so some of the, especially about this, I would like to say that most of this set of the 7 directives, where we call it police reforms, it has not generally addressed the problem of the constabulary. If we want to give a better service to the common man, we must have addressed in Supreme Court have also should have also addressed the problem, because police doesn't work in
you're a very clever politician. I grant you that.
We have so many.
I asked you to set a deadline for implementing the reforms. What you're doing instead is to talk about all sorts of other reforms that are needed in addition to the ones the Supreme Court has required. But the problem is, there's no denying it. There's a whole lot of reform that's needed. There's a whole lot of augmentation of infrastructure that we haven't even talked about in terms of transport, communication and forensic support. All of it is needed. But I'm simply asking a key question. When will your government deliver? Let me put that to Maya Daruwala. This is a government that functions, Maya Daruwala, because the Prime Minister personally ensures that things are given the focus and attention they need. Do you think police reforms is something Mr. Modi should himself take up, because it's such a critical part of that promise of good governance he was elected on? Do you think he should take personal charge of pushing these through both at the centre and the state level?
I don't know whether he can take personal charge, but certainly he can show political will in the sense of guidance, in the sense of pressing for it. When the Congress was in power, the Congress states did all the wicked things that it possibly could in terms of police reform. The BJP states have not shown much difference. Now, Mr. Satyapal Singh is comes from Maharashtra. Presently, the Maharashtra government has passed a law amending, ostensibly in compliance with the Supreme Court orders, which does everything to put all the bad practice into legislation. Well, you cannot have policing of the way that you had up to now. You have to have policing by consent.
Okay.
You have to have consultation with the people before you make these laws.
But I want to
these
come
laws
back.
are all made in private.
But I want to underline the point you began with, that you hope Mr. Modi will put personal effort and will behind this. Even if he can't take personal charge, you hope he'll give it a high priority on his political agenda. Is that a point you can re-emphasize for me quickly?
You cannot have good governance, you cannot have development without having justice. And this is the gateway to justice, and presently it is absolutely unjust.
That's a very clever way of putting it. This is a gateway to justice. This is in fact the gateway to justice, and for many people it's actually closed. How do we convince the Modi government that this has to be right at the top of their priorities? Otherwise, good governance will simply remain a catchy phrase and not be something that's delivered. How do we convince them?
You're absolutely right. Unless the pressure comes from the top, nothing will happen. Because
how do we get the man at the top to realize he has to put pressure?
What I'm saying is, it was also there in 2009 Congress manifesto. They did nothing. It will come only if they understand who's obstructing implementation of these recommendations. And
can I stop you there? Before they get to understanding who's obstructing implementation, you have to convince them that implementation itself is important. How do you convince Mr. Modi that he must personally involve himself in ensuring police reforms happen? Otherwise, good governance, which he's promised, won't happen. How do we convince him of that?
I think it is not only Mr. Modi. Every politician must understand police cannot make them win elections, but it can make them lose elections if it doesn't protect the life and property of every ordinary citizen.
Very cleverly put. We must make them realize their own future depends on this. Otherwise, they could lose the next election.
Yeah, but the point I was making was that they'll have to get the real obstruction in the way of these implementation.
That will only happen once they realize implementation will happen. After they realize implementation has happened, will they tackle the problems in implementing? The first thing is to convince them. Let me very quickly end with you, Mr. Ramachandran. You were a great defender of the court, and I understand your amicus curiae. You can hardly not defend the court. Your job requires it, and so does your responsibility. But as you said, there is a new bench that's been constituted. Hopefully, we no longer are in that era of chief ministers who don't give this issue importance or were negligent. There's therefore real hope. There's therefore real hope that in November, when the new bench sits down to look at this issue, they will move forward. Can you not, at that point, suggest to the court, judges, 8 years have gone by, your orders have been kicked in the teeth and defied. It's time you threaten contempt of court. Otherwise, you'll be defied for 8 more. Can you not give that advice at that point?
I can. I'll do it in my own way.
Okay. In other words, you can, you will, but you'll do it a lot more politely than I was suggesting. But I'm repeating for the audience, though you're smiling, you have undertaken in a polite, discreet, diplomatic way to gently say to the court, Gentlemen, you need to act because you can't take up this defiance for longer. Is that correct? Give me a quick yes. What was that? What does that sound amount to? Yes or no? Or somewhere in
Yes.
between? Yes. Okay. Yes with a cough.
Yes, I said yes. Y-E-S. Y-E-S.
Thank you, Mr. Ramachandran. You spelt it out and it couldn't be clearer. Let's hope that, in fact, we have some movement. 8 years is long enough for state governments and the central government to defy the Supreme Court, with the Supreme Court accepting it with nothing more than just a grin. My thanks to all of my guests for joining me.